The first sound I heard after they revived me wasn't my baby's cry. It was my husband's voice, low and cold, speaking to his lawyer on the phone in the hallway just outside my hospital room. "The contract is clear, Jonathan," he said, his voice a blade of ice. The survivability clause was contingent on a natural, unassisted birth. The emergency C-section constitutes a breach. She gets nothing. The child, however, is mine. NMY heart, which had literally stopped beating on the operating table just an hour earlier, felt like it was stopping all over again. I had survived. I had survived a catastrophic placental abruption, a crash C-section, and 2 minutes of clinical death to bring our son into the world. It was a miracle. The doctors had called me a miracle. NBUT to my husband Harrison, I was not a miracle. I was a breach of contract. You see, I hadn't just married a man. I had married into a dynasty. The Sterling family fortune was ancient, vast, and governed by a set of arcane, ironclad rules. The most important rule of all concerned the continuation of the bloodline. To inherit, a Sterling heir had to be born naturally and without flaw, a testament to the strength and purity of the lineage. Harrison had convinced me it was a mere formality, a relic of the past. He had promised me our love was more important than any dusty old document. He had held my face in his hands and told me that our child was all that mattered. NHE had lied. NTHE, joy of my survival, the miracle of my son's birth, died in that hallway. It was murdered by his cruelty. He wasn't my loving husband, relieved that his wife and child were alive. He was a corporate predator, executing a clause. He had waited until I was at my most vulnerable, my body torn open, my life hanging by a thread, to reveal his true nature. NHE walked back into the room, his face a mask of polite concern that didn't reach his cold gray eyes. "Darling," he said, his voice smooth as silk, "the doctors told me you were awake. I'm so glad you're back with us." NHE didn't come near me. He walked over to the bassinet, where our son, a perfect, beautiful boy I had not yet been allowed to hold, was sleeping. He looked down at him, not with a father's love, but with the possessive gaze of a man admiring a newly acquired asset. "He's perfect," Harrison murmured. A true Sterling in that moment, I understood. I was just the vessel, a means to an end. And now that I had breached my contract by failing to deliver the heir according to his family's barbaric rules, I was being discarded. He had his son, he had his inheritance, and he was going to make my life a living hell to ensure I walked away with nothing but the scars. My miracle had become my misery, and the battle for my son and my soul had just begun. NIF, your blood is running cold. Please hit that like button and subscribe. You need to witness the strength of a mother who was left for dead and refused to stay down. And I met Harrison Croft Sterling IV at a charity auction. I was the event planner, a woman who had built her own small business from the ground up with grit and determination. He was the scion of one of the country's oldest and wealthiest families, a man who moved with an aura of effortless power and inherited grace. NHE was devastatingly charming. He pursued me with a single-minded intensity that was both flattering and overwhelming. He wasn't interested in the socialites and heiresses he was expected to marry. He told me he was captivated by my independence, my realness. He said I was a breath of fresh air in his stuffy, suffocating world, and I, a woman who had always been pragmatic and self-reliant, found myself swept away by the romance. He showed me a world of unimaginable luxury, of private jets and sprawling estates, but he always framed it as a world he wanted to escape with me. NTHE first red flag appeared in the form of a prenuptial agreement. It wasn't just a document, it was a leather-bound tome, hundreds of pages long, presented to me by a team of his family's lawyers. It detailed not just the division of assets, but a code of conduct, expectations for public appearances, and, most chillingly, the progeny addendum. This section laid out the ancient Sterling rules for producing an heir. It spoke of genetic purity, natural delivery, and the unblemished arrival of the next generation. It stipulated that any deviation, any medical intervention deemed unnecessary by a panel of Sterling-approved doctors would render the mother's claim to the family trust null and void, and I was horrified. "Harrison, this is barbaric," I said, my hands trembling as I held the document. "It's a breeding contract." He took the papers from me, his expression one of practiced exasperation. "Darling, it's meaningless," he sighed, tossing it onto the table. "It's a relic. My grandfather insisted on it. It's just something we have to sign to appease the old guard on the family board. It has nothing to do with us. Our marriage, our family, will be built on love, not on these ridiculous rules." NHE was so convincing. He made me feel like we were a team, two modern lovers, conspiring against his archaic family. He promised to protect me from them. I was so in love, so blinded by the life he was offering, that I chose to believe him. I signed the contract. I walked into my gilded cage with a smile on my face, believing the man holding the key loved me. And our first few years of marriage were idyllic on the surface, but I slowly began to see the truth. Harrison wasn't rebelling against his family. He was the perfect embodiment of their values. His life was a performance of power. His love for my independence was a lie. He systematically isolated me from my business, my friends, my old life, until my entire existence revolved around him. When I became pregnant, his true nature began to surface. He was ecstatic, but his joy was cold and possessive. He referred to the baby not as our son, but as the heir. He hired a team of doctors, the same ones mentioned in the contract, who monitored my pregnancy with a detached, clinical precision. They vetoed my choice of hospital, my birth plan, everything. NMY pregnancy was treated not as a natural process, but as a high-stakes business venture. I was the vessel carrying the company's most valuable asset, and any personal desires I had were irrelevant. The relic of a contract was suddenly being quoted to me in meetings with doctors and lawyers. Harrison's promises of love and protection were replaced by cold, contractual obligations. The misery had begun long before the birth. I just hadn't allowed myself to see it. An NMY due date came and went. The days ticked by, each one filled with a mounting sense of dread. Harrison and his team of doctors were adamant. The birth had to be natural. No induction, no intervention. The Sterling way is to let nature take its course. Dr. Alcott, the lead physician, told me, his tone leaving no room for argument, and I was a week overdue when the pain started. But they weren't right. They were sharp, constant, and localized in one spot. I knew something was wrong. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of doom. "Harrison, something is wrong," I pleaded, doubled over in pain. "We have to go to the hospital." NHE and Dr. Alcott exchanged a look. It was a look of annoyance, not concern. "Anxiety is common in first-time mothers, Amelia," the doctor said placidly. "Let's not be dramatic. Your vitals are stable." They were trying to manage me, to keep me at home, to ensure the natural birth at all costs. But the pain intensified, becoming a blinding, tearing agony. I collapsed. That was the last thing I remember before the world went gray. I woke up to a scene of frantic chaos. Paramedics were in our bedroom. I was on a gurney, an oxygen mask on my face. I heard snippets of conversation, massive blood loss, placental abruption. "Fetal heart rate is dropping fast," Harrison was arguing with the paramedics. "You have to take her to the Sterling wing at Mount Sinai," he was demanding. "There's no time," a paramedic shot back. "We're going to the closest trauma center." "We're losing them both." NTHE ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and pain. I was fading. I knew it. My last coherent thought was a desperate prayer for my son. Let him live. Please, just let him live. NTHE. Next time I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital room, the rhythmic beeping of machines the only sound. A kind-faced nurse was checking my IVN. "Welcome back," she said softly. You gave us all quite a scare. My baby, I rasped, my throat raw. He's a fighter, she smiled. A healthy baby boy, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. He's in the nursery. You can see him as soon as you're a little stronger. Relief, so powerful it felt like a physical wave, washed over me. We had made it. We had survived. My joy was a brilliant, blinding sun, and then Harrison walked in, fresh from his phone call in the hallway, and he brought with him a cold, cruel eclipse that extinguished that sun completely. He explained the situation with the chilling clarity of a CEO discussing a failed merger. The emergency C-section, performed at a non-approved hospital, was a clear violation of the progeny addendum. As such, I had forfeited all rights and benefits outlined in our marital contract. The house, the assets, the financial support, all gone, but the child, he continued, his voice smooth, is a sterling. He will be raised as such. You, of course, will be allowed supervised visitation, provided you adhere to a strict code of conduct. We wouldn't want to cause a scandal that could harm the boy's future. And I stared at him, speechless. He had waited until I was physically and emotionally shattered, until I was at my absolute weakest, to declare war. He had turned my miracle into a legal maneuver, my survival into a contractual breach. He wasn't just divorcing me, he was trying to erase me. He was trying to take my son and leave me with nothing but the memory of a joy that had been murdered in cold blood. NNTHE moment. I was discharged from the hospital. The reality of my new situation became brutally clear. The locks on our home, his home, had been changed. A polite but immovable security guard handed me a single box of my personal effects and a letter from Harrison's legal team informing me that any attempt to enter the property would be considered trespassing. And I was homeless, recovering from major surgery, and cut off from my child. The joy of his birth was a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing, desperate ache. Harrison had constructed a fortress around our son, both literal and legal. The Sterling estate was a walled compound, and the contract I had so foolishly signed was a legal fortress just as impenetrable. My first meeting with a lawyer was a soul-crushing experience. He looked at the prenuptial agreement and shook his head. "This is the most ironclad document I have ever seen, Mrs. Sterling," he said grimly. "They have thought of everything. Challenging this would take years and millions of dollars you don't have." Harrison's strategy was clear: to bleed me dry, emotionally and financially, until I gave up and accepted his crumbs. Supervised visits with my own child, forever under his thumb. NHE allowed me to see our son, whom he had named Harrison Croft Sterling V, without my input, for 1 hour, twice a week. The visits took place in a sterile, soulless conference room at his lawyer's office. A nanny, whose salary I was sure was more than my old yearly income, would bring the baby in, watch me with cold, judgmental eyes for exactly 60 minutes, and then take him away. And I was not allowed to be alone with him. I was not allowed to take photos. I was instructed to refrain from excessive emotional displays that could upset the child's routine. And each visit was a fresh form of torture. I would hold my beautiful boy, memorizing his scent, the feel of his tiny fingers wrapped around mine, all while my heart was breaking. I would sing him the lullabies my mother had sung to me, my voice thick with unshed tears. The joy of seeing him was inextricably linked with the misery of having to leave him. Harrison never attended these visits. He remained a distant, powerful puppeteer, pulling the strings of my misery from afar. He was punishing me for surviving, for not delivering his heir in the correct way. He was making an example of me. NMY. Old life was gone. My business had withered without my attention. My savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. I was staying on a friend's couch, a ghost of the woman I once was. Despair was a constant, heavy cloak. There were moments when I thought about giving in, about signing the papers that would grant him full custody in exchange for a small, insulting settlement. It would be easier. It would end the fight, NBUT. Then I would look at the one precious photo I had of my son, taken by the nurse in the hospital before Harrison had banned it. I would look at his perfect, innocent face, and a fire would ignite in the ashes of my heart. He had taken my home, my money, my name. He would not take my son. I had survived death to give him life. I would survive this to get him back. I didn't have Harrison's money or his power, but I had something he could never understand: a mother's love, a force of nature he had foolishly underestimated. And I knew I couldn't win a direct legal assault. The contract was a fortress, so I had to find a different way in. I had to find a crack in the Sterling family's perfect, polished facade. I had to fight like a spy, not a soldier. My target became the nanny, a stern, middle-aged woman named Ms. Albright. She was a Sterling loyalist, having worked for the family for decades. She saw me as a disgrace, a flawed vessel who had failed in her one duty. But she had one vulnerability. She loved my son. I could see it in the way she held him, the brief, unguarded moments of tenderness when she thought I wasn't looking. During my supervised visits, I stopped talking about my pain or my rights. I started talking about my son. I would share stories about my pregnancy, about the music I played for him, about my hopes for his future. I treated her not as a prison guard, but as a partner in his care. He loves the sound of classical music, I'd say casually, especially Chopin. It always made him kick. Or, my mother used to sing a French lullaby. He has her eyes. I wish I could sing it to him without a stranger watching me. I was planting seeds, humanizing myself, reminding her that I was his mother, not just a contractual breach. I was also subtly gathering intelligence. I learned the layout of the house, the staff's schedule, the location of the nursery, all from her small, offhand comments. An MY breakthrough came from an unexpected source: my sister, the one who was slowly being consumed by the same genetic disease that had taken our mother. Her mind was fading, but her heart was as fierce as ever. She had been a historian before she got sick, and she had a deep understanding of old money and their secrets. These families, Amelia, she told me during one of our calls, her voice weak but her words clear. They don't just have contracts, they have ghosts, skeletons in their closets. Find the ghost in the nursery. NHER words sparked an idea. The Sterlings were obsessed with their unblemished lineage. What if it wasn't unblemished? What if Harrison's own birth, or his father's, wasn't as perfect as the legend claimed? I needed proof. I needed to get into the Sterling fortress. And Ms. Albright was my key. During one visit, I accidentally spilled a bottle of water on her, apologizing profusely. In the commotion, I managed to lift her security key card for a split second, pressing it into a piece of clay I had concealed in my palm. It was a desperate, long-shot move. NTHAT Knight, a friend from my old event planning business, an expert in security systems, created a duplicate key card from the impression. The next step was the hardest. I had to go back into that house. NTWO nights later, during a massive gala I knew Harrison was hosting downtown, I put my plan into motion. Dressed in black, my heart pounding like a drum, I scaled the back wall of the estate, a skill I never thought I'd need, and used the cloned keycard to slip into the house through a service entrance. NTHE House was silent, a vast, dark museum. I made my way to the nursery. It was a beautiful room, but cold and sterile, lacking any personal touch. My son was sleeping peacefully, watched over by a junior night nurse. My real destination was the library, the heart of the Sterling dynasty, the room where Harrison's father kept the family archives. And I searched for hours, my hands shaking, sifting through generations of leather-bound journals, photo albums, and legal documents. And then I found it, tucked away in the back of a dusty medical ledger from the 1980s, a hospital record for the birth of Harrison Croft Sterling the 1V. And next to the method of delivery section, in faded but clear ink, was the word forceps, NAN-assisted birth, an intervention, a breach of the very contract he was using to destroy me. The perfect, unblemished heir was a lie. The ghost in the nursery wasn't a spirit. It was a hypocrite. I took a photo of the page with my phone, the flash, a shocking burst of light in the dark, silent room. I had him. And I didn't go to my lawyer with the information. A legal battle would still take years, and Harrison's team would find a way to bury the evidence, to claim it was a forgery. I had to do what he had done to me, strike publicly, without warning, and with devastating force. Harrison was the chairman of the board of the Sterling Foundation, the family's massive philanthropic arm. Their annual charity ball, a lavish affair that was the highlight of the city's social calendar, was in 2 weeks. It was the family's biggest night, a public performance of their generosity and prestige. It was the perfect stage for his downfall, and I called in every favor I had left from my event planning days. I got a job with the catering company working the event. It was humbling, but it was my way in. NTHE night of the ball, the grand ballroom was a sea of jewels and tuxedos. I moved through the crowd, my face hidden by a professional, anonymous expression, my heart a cold, steady engine. Harrison was on the stage, basking in the applause, the perfect image of the benevolent patriarch. NN. I had arranged it with a projectionist I knew, a man Harrison's company had once fired unjustly. During the middle of Harrison's self-congratulatory speech, the massive screen behind him, which was supposed to be showing a slideshow of the foundation's good works, suddenly flickered. And then my evidence appeared, projected 20 feet high for the entire city's elite to see. It was the photo of the medical ledger, the page detailing Harrison's own birth. I had circled the word forceps in a stark, brutal red. A confused murmur went through the crowd. Then my voice, pre-recorded, filled the ballroom's sound system. "Good evening," my voice said, clear and steady. "My name is Amelia Sterling. Many of you know me as the wife of the man on the stage. He is currently trying to take my son from me, based on a family contract that I breached by having an emergency C-section to save my child's life. As you can see, it seems the unblemished Sterling lineage is a myth. The man who is trying to destroy me for a flawed birth is, himself, a product of one. NTHE silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a dynasty's deepest secret being laid bare. Harrison stood on the stage, frozen, his face a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. The spotlight that he loved so much had become an interrogation lamp. I did not want this public spectacle, my voice continued, but he left me no choice. I am not a contractual breach. I am a mother, and I will not be erased. I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I slipped out the back entrance as the first frantic whispers of the scandal began to erupt. I had not just revealed a secret. I had shattered the foundational myth of the Sterling family. I had turned their obsession with purity and perfection against them. NNTHE fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Sterlings. The story was everywhere, a delicious scandal involving old money, hypocrisy, and a mother's desperate fight. The Sterling brand, so carefully cultivated for generations, was now associated with cruelty and deceit. The foundation's board was in an uproar. The family elders were furious, not at Harrison's cruelty, but at his carelessness in letting the secret get out. NHI's fortress had been breached. His power, which relied on an illusion of untouchable perfection, was gone. NTWO days later, I received a call. Not from Harrison, but from his father, Harrison Croft Sterling III, the true patriarch of the family. He requested a meeting. A lone WE met in a neutral location, a private suite at a hotel. He was an old man, but his eyes were sharp and shrewd. He didn't apologize. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You have caused this family a great deal of embarrassment, young lady," he began, his voice raspy. "Your son caused my son to be without his mother," I countered, my voice steady. I simply corrected the public record. NHE studied me for a long moment. "What do you want?" "I want my son," I said simply. "I want the prenuptial agreement torn up. I want a divorce, and I want full, unadulterated custody of my child. I want a life for him that is free from your contracts, your rules, and your cruelty. And if we refuse, then I will talk to every journalist who will listen," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I will write a book. I will tell the world every last detail about the Sterling family's values. Your embarrassment will become a permanent stain. You see, I have nothing left to lose, which makes me much more powerful than you." NHE knew I was right. I was no longer a frightened, heartbroken woman. I was a warrior who had faced death and had come out the other side with nothing but a righteous fury. NHE agreed to my terms. All of them. The contract was voided. The divorce was swift and quiet. I was given a generous settlement, not that I cared about the money, and most importantly, I was granted full and sole custody of my son. I named him Leo, my lion THE day. I walked out of the courthouse. I went straight to the Sterling estate to pick him up. Ms. Albright brought him to me in the grand foyer. There were tears in her eyes. "You are a good mother," she whispered, handing him to me. I held my son in my arms, his warmth a solid, real thing against my chest. I walked out the massive front doors and never looked back, and our new life was small, quiet, and gloriously normal. We moved to a small town by the sea, into a little house with a garden. I started my event planning business again, on my own terms. The silence of my grief was replaced by the beautiful, everyday sounds of my son's laughter. I made sure his life was filled with love, music, and messy, imperfect joy. We painted, we gardened, we walked on the beach. I taught him the lullabies my mother had sung to me, the true and valuable inheritance of my family. And Harrison became a ghost in our lives, a distant figure I would occasionally see in financial news headlines. He never tried to contact us. In the end, I don't think he ever wanted a son, he just wanted an heir. And when the asset became a liability, he lost interest. And one day, when Leo was about 5 years old, we were looking through an old photo album. He pointed to a picture of me in the hospital taken just after he was born. "You look sad, Mommy," he said, his small face serious. I pulled him onto my lap, hugging him tight. "I was for a little while," I said softly, "but then I remembered something. I remembered that I had you." And that was a miracle. NHE looked at me, his eyes, so much like my mother's, full of love. "What's a miracle?" I kissed the top of his head. "A miracle," I said, my heart swelling with a joy so profound it erased every last scar, "is when something wonderful happens that you thought was impossible. A miracle is you, my love. You are my miracle." Harrison had tried to turn my miracle into misery. He had tried to bury my joy under the weight of his cruelty and his contracts, but he had failed. Because true joy, the kind that comes from a love that survives the impossible, can't be killed. It can't be bought or sold or legislated away in a contract. It can only be earned. And in the quiet, beautiful life I had built for my son, I had found a joy more valuable than any sterling fortune, a joy that was truly, and finally, mine.